Welcome to Books in the World. Books in the World is produced by Cape Cod Writers Center and Cape Media Center. I'm Catherine Cullen, and today I'm here with Iris G. Leigh, who is the author of LIZA'S Secrets, which is a wonderful domestic thriller. And I'm going to be asking her questions about her book, as well as her process as a writer. And Iris and I know each other, so I've always been fascinated with this, and I hope that you are too. Iris, first of all, tell me how you started. What made you write LIZA'S Secrets?
Well, basically, Catherine, I started it as kind of an event from a project from a library writing class. And they gave me a prompt, and I started answering the prompt. And then the next week they gave another prompt, and I tried to connect it to the first one. By the time I got done, I had a chapter of this book written. And at the end of it, I looked at it, and I was kind of pushed into writing it because I had had some ideas. And the ideas were what ifs. And basically the what ifs were, my brakes weren't working well in my car at the time. And I thought, what if my husband wanted to plan the perfect crime? And so I started with that as a what if. And then I also looked at our home equity loans, and I said, what if either of us can sign out for those? What if either of us wanted to steal money from the house? And all of a sudden I had the beginnings of a thriller.
For the benefit, that's wonderful. For the benefit of our audience, what do you mean when you say a prompt?
A prompt is like, I'm trying to think of the one that came out of this book. I think it was, if only I had known, was the very first prompt I ever had to answer. So they give you, the class basically had about 6 weeks, and every week they gave you another prompt. If only I had known. I don't remember the second one, but I attached it. And so if only I had known that either of us could take out a loan, or that either of us that my husband was trying to kill me, what would I do? And that's how I kind of did it.
In other words, a prompt is kind of the seed of an idea. It's like the classic, it was a dark and stormy night.
Yes.
And then you fill in from there.
And then what happened? And that's kind of how I write. I didn't know that at the time, but that became how I write, because every time I sit down, I give myself a prompt.
That's interesting. How do you write? How does the plot, first of all, tell us a little bit about what LIZA'S Secrets is about. But if you can, tell us how that comes to you. What's your process? Okay.
So first of all, a disclaimer, my husband is not trying to kill me or steal our money.
I know her husband, and it's true, he's not.
So this was an imaginary scenario in my head. And the way I write is I give myself prompts. Specifically, after I've written something, I read it to myself, and then I say, oh, what will happen next? And that's exactly what I do. And I start integrating these people that are in my chapters into my world. Like, I think of them, I know who they are, I know what they're going to do next. I kind of get an idea of where they're going, but I don't know that until I actually sit down and ask them, where are you going next? It's kind of...
You literally ask your characters.
I do. I think of them sometimes, like if I walk a lot, I like to take walks, and I often come to resolutions that way. Like, I'll be saying, I wonder what they're going to do next, and then all of a sudden I sit down and I do it. I write it out.
You describe writing as if it's an internal dialogue between you and the characters who populate your books.
It is, and because I have been writing sequels to all of these books with Eliza Glazner as sort of the main character, I start having repeat characters, and I know how they behave and what they're going to say. I have 2 characters in one of the subsequent books that become roommates, and they're always teasing each other, and I actually understand what they're teasing each other about. I have no knowledge of why I know this, but I do.
Tell us a little bit about what LIZA'S Secrets is about.
Okay. It's a story of a woman who wakes up one day and says, my husband's trying to kill me. I'm afraid of him. He's a bully. And I need to get out of here before he really does. And so she has a cat. She loves her cat. Her husband hates the cat. And she says, I can't leave the cat. So she grabs the cat. She dyes her hair. She packs up her suitcases with anything that's precious. And she decides to leave. But her car isn't working well. So she engages a friend and says, can you get me a car that will work better? And she trades her car in for an old kind of clunker, and he gets her some new identification, and she gets in the car and she starts driving in the middle of the night. And she lives in New Jersey in an affluent suburb, and on her way out the door she leaves a note saying, I'm going to Florida to see my cousins. And she actually calls her cousin and says, if my husband starts looking for me, can you cover? And that's her clues, and that's what she decides to do. On the way out, she says, well, I can't go south because that's what I'm...
Where does she go?
She goes to Cape Cod, and she winds up in off-season Chatham. And anybody who's lived in off-season Chatham or anywhere off-season on the Cape knows it's fairly quiet in the winter, and she's only been there as a summer folk.
You're describing a woman who's reinventing herself as she goes along.
She sure is. And she has no idea how to do it because she has no professional credentials. She has nothing in her repertoire to get jobs, to find housing or anything. But remember how I write. So I get her looking at the signs on the New York Thruway saying, okay, or the Jersey Turnpike saying, okay, where am I going? And then she says, Cape Cod, I think I'll go there. And then when she gets there, she has dilemmas, but of course any of us would have dilemmas. So what's next? She has to find housing. And so she winds up in an old motel in Yarmouth, actually not a fictional place that I made up, run by a lovely young man or older man actually, who is single, and they start a relationship. He
becomes a romantic interest?
Well, he becomes an interest. We don't know where he goes at the beginning,
okay.
So I'll leave it there. And they start becoming friends, and he helps her find a job with a local woman who's looking for a fill-in for a waitress. And from there, she gets a job in Chatham at a fictitious store selling women's clothing.
Is there a part of you in Liza?
I think as in any author, there's always a part of any of us in our characters. Liza's story is certainly not my story, but yeah, there's pieces of her. Like, there's an incident where she's trying to learn to ride a bike, or Jeff decides, oh, I'm going to treat her for a bike ride, and she's out on the bike trail falling, and she can't ride a bike. And, so something like that had happened to me. So there's always a little incident or incidents through the book where, you draw on your own experiences. But it's funny, somebody started yelling at me once at a book signing, why did I have Liza do something? And I said, I didn't do it, she did it. I mean, she really thought I was a bad parent because of one way that Liza behaved with her grown son. And I laughed. I said to myself, and then someone defended me out in the audience who had read it. And I was like, wow, this is becoming a heated discussion over a fictitious character with a fictitious plot. So.
But isn't that a sign that the book is really good? Because when someone reads it and they read a character and they start getting angry at the character is real to them.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought of it that way. I just was like finding myself defending her and then realizing that I was defending something that was like air. I mean, it didn't exist, but yeah.
But it really did.
In her mind, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
And isn't that what a writer looks for the characters to become real in the mind of the reader?
Yeah, it does, because they're real in my head. So
Sure.
I want them to be real in everyone else's. And this book was many, many years in the making. I was part of a writing group, as you've been part of our writing group. And, it started as a fairly simple endeavor to write this book. But as it started getting closer and closer to me wanting to publish it, it went through a lot of revisions. And once you start playing with it and revising it, you start owning it even more. And so for me, the characters become really real. I mean, there's no there's no way that I can't tell you what they're going to wear tomorrow or what they're going to eat tomorrow. I started knowing all that.
It sounds like the writing process is extremely focused because you're listening to those internal voices. Do you find writing to be isolating or lonely?
No, I find it relaxing. Time just flies. I sit down and I'm writing, and I used to have my own office with my own desk and a whole room that I used, and then we moved and I got the corner of a room, and I thought, how am I going to write there on this tiny little desk in a corner? You know what, it doesn't matter where I am or what I'm doing. When I'm doing it, I'm doing it. And if I don't feel like writing, it wouldn't matter if I had the best desk in the world and the most wonderful space. It's really an internal activity.
I understand that writing is one thing, publishing is another.
Oh my goodness.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey in connection with not only publishing, but finding a publisher? How do you do that?
So it starts with everyone who writes a book says, this book is great, and I'm going to get an agent, and then they're going to sell it to one of the big publishers, and then I'm going to, and then it goes to bookstores, and then that's it. Well, if you believe that, and you put your teeth under the pillow, you're not going to get money. So, sorry. There is no way that it's that simple. At least for me, it surely wasn't. I must have sent it out to about 100 people, 100 agents, got rejected at various levels of rejections. Some gave feedback, most did not. And it took years. It was like 11 years of writing.
Wow.
The whole process. And so
what is the process of checking with an agent or checking with a publisher? Do you just write them a letter and say, gee, I wrote a book and it's about thus and so?
Yeah, there's that, but they often ask you lots of questions. What's your biography? What's your credentials? Why is this book going to be a bestseller? What's it like other books? What is your target audience? Who is going to read it? They have a million questions.
Is there a name for that process?
Querying.
Querying.
Yeah. So I did all that, and then and the book was in first person, and then I kind of didn't get any traction. So I thought maybe I'll look at this book a little more critically, and my writing group did too. We reorged a lot of the book so that a lot of the action came before the backstories, and then I put it into from first person to third person, and I rewrote all the chapters about her mean, miserable husband because I thought they were too graphic in terms of just too obvious, so I wanted them a little more subtle. And that just took forever. It took another year to do that. And then Barbara Struna, who's also in our writing group and a member of the Cape Cod Writing Association, she suggested going straight for a small publisher. So I sent out many fewer queries for that, and Black Rose Writing was interested, and they sent me a letter, and I sent it to them, and then they requested I make some serious revisions. So it's a huge, huge process, for me anyway.
It sounds like a huge process, period. What happened when you heard from Black Rose? What's the process then?
Well,
I seem to remember being present.
Yeah, you were. We were having breakfast when I got the email, and I went ballistic, and we were in the parking lot.
You did. It seems to me I remember uttering a screech that could be heard into the next town.
It was so exciting. And then I thought, well, I'm done. I've got a publisher. That actually wasn't true. I had to re-edit and re-edit and re-edit. And it was like another year before the book was published. So it was April 2024 that it actually came out. By then I had gone through a very smooth process for the cover. I really liked what they picked. They picked a lovely cover.
It is a beautiful cover.
Yeah, I had sent them an idea, and this was what they got, and I thought theirs was much better than what I even imagined. And then the editing part was just a real slog. You just have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And I had many friends read it. I know I had you read it and people looking at it. But after a while, when you're editing and re-editing and looking at things, you start glossing over it. Your eyes just can't find things. So it took a long time and many, many trials to get through that.
One of the things that really struck me when I read your book, in fact, when I read your other books as well, is that the characters take on their own life for me because they're each very different. When you're reading dialogue in your book, you can hear the different voices. How do you get to that?
I think that is just me understanding who they are. I don't think I do it on purpose. In fact, you and I talked about that. I have no idea how that happens, but I hear different voices when I'm writing, so I know that they're different. Like I had two older adults in one of my other books, and they were having an argument. I can still to this day, right now, hear their voices. I know exactly how they bickered and what they were bickering about, and they never stopped. And I can, it's like they've become very real to me. So maybe them being real to me makes me able to make them real to you.
Thank you, because I think that's the key to having the reader be engaged. And your book is so incredibly easy to be engaged in.
Oh, thank you.
A close friend of mine who read your book said that he fell in love with it on the first page because he fell in love with the first line. Tell me what the first line is. Tell us what the first line is, because it's great.
Yes, so the first line is, hate tasted of blood and rage. Or did I get that wrong?
I think it was fear tasted of blood and rage.
All right, now we're going to argue over it, so I'll look. Hate tasted of blood and rage.
You were right.
I was right. I knew I wrote that. But
in any event, it was
that
terrific.
was not there in the first 500 reiterations of this book. So that was just one night I thought of it, and I said, yes, how does hate taste? And, she had bitten her lip, and it was bleeding, and she was, when you get really tense and you bite your lips, that's what she was driving, and that's what she did.
Do you have other books on the same theme?
Well, I don't want to tell too much because that would spoil the end of this, but there are other books. This is actually a prequel to the rest of my books. After this book, Liza becomes, she winds up in Chatham and stays here on the Cape.
What does she do professionally?
Can
you tell us that?
I can. She becomes a detective. So my second book, which I've written and I'm in the process of editing, is actually the first book of her as a detective.
By a detective, do you mean a police detective?
No, she's a private investigator, and she specializes in looking for missing people because she has hidden for so long. She knows how to hide, and she knows how others can cover their tracks and hide. So she's very successful in that.
How much, without giving anything away that makes this a thriller and a mystery, how does Liza change her identity? Does she operate under a different name?
Yes. So that is part of the secret, and I really don't want to give that away. However, it's pretty much in the first chapter. So if you're out there and you want to read it, you'll find it.
Sounds like a plan. Is there anything that you would like the audience to know, not only about the process of writing and publishing, but about what you bring to it, what a writer, who's maybe a beginning writer, would need to bring to the process? So
I think what's important is to get a good storyline in your head and to say to yourself, what if? And anything can really be a storyline. So what if I came into the studio and I was supposed to give a talk, but instead there was somebody over there with a knife? What if? And then were they trying to kill authors? Is that what the studio does? I mean, how would I know? So all of a sudden, if you can take your imagination and go just one step further, you know, I go out to dinner and I look at people a lot. I people watch, and I'll sit there and I'll go, wow, is that couple having a fight? I wonder what that fight's about. I wonder what he did wrong. I wonder what she did wrong. I wonder what they're going to do. You know, are they going to disrupt the whole place? Are they? So all of a sudden you've got a story. And I think if you can keep yourself open to looking around for stories, or if your family has a cool story, or if you have a child who, you know, your own kids or somebody else's children, you know, who are fascinated with, you know, like, I don't know, horses or something, what would happen in the interactions? It's really the plot drives a story, but the people do too.
It sounds like a lot of the process of writing is the power of observation, what you learn from the world around you and from the people around you.
I think so, and I think it's also part of reading. Like, I read a lot, and I think good writers read. They're opening themselves to other people's stories. And so you see stories everywhere after a while.
What would you tell a member of the audience who has a book in them and wants to get it out?
I say start it. You know, don't, everybody says I have a book. I can't tell you how many people say, I have a book I am going to write a book. I am going to do something. Don't put it in that way. Say, I have started to write my book today by writing 4 sentences. Just write 1 sentence, just 2. But I think one of the things that I've also been doing, which is really not something I'm planning on publishing, is writing my memoirs. And I start with stories of my childhood, and I wake up every Monday, I'm in a memoir group, and every Monday I have no idea what I'm going to write. And like half an hour before the group, I hit a panic button and I say, okay, what do I remember about being 6? And then I just write something, and it's usually a story. And so we all have stories, and sometimes, you know, if we wanted to give them a huge audience, we can turn them into a book or a short story or an essay. Or if we want to keep them for ourselves, we just write a little vignette.
It sounds like you've been writing for most of your life.
Yeah, I have. I started writing in the basement of my parents' house. They had a rec room in the 50s, knotty pine. And my dad put an old typewriter down there, an old Remington typewriter. And I'd just go down there and I wrote plays, and I wrote short stories, and I wrote poems. And I even had a play produced once as an 11-year-old, which was kind of fun.
How did you do that at 11?
It was in Sunday school. I don't have a clue what it was about, but I do remember having that. And I got the star lead, and no one spoke to me after that. But I do remember that part. But, you know, I've always kind of used it as a place to go and a way to sort of express myself. Interestingly enough, I've never been good at keeping a diary or a journal.
It sounds like your books, in a way, are your diary and your journal.
Maybe. I haven't thought of that.
From the way you're describing writing,
Yeah.
to my ear, it sounds a lot like it's a way of getting your inner life onto the page for other people.
Yeah, sometimes.
Is that part of it for you?
Sometimes. The books I write, yes. The memoir stuff I write, no. I've had people who've wanted me to publish stuff, and I don't. And that there's that line where you want to keep your own self inside the line in the box. So there are things that I wouldn't publish, but I do turn out essays once in a while, and I send them to magazines. I'm waiting to hear from one right now.
If you can tell us, what's that essay about?
Oh, it's about everything in my house being automated. So a couple weeks ago, we kept getting messages from the car, and we couldn't figure out how to answer the messages, and they were coming up on the dash. It was a new car with a whole computerized system. Then we were getting messages from the heating system saying that it was that it was too cold in the house and we had to have that fixed, and it was just an error message. And then we got another message from our house saying something had happened. And I said to my husband, I can't live like this. Like every time I turn around, a computer is sending me a text message or a phone message. And when I said that, my grandson said, "Okay, boomer." And I said, "Okay, that's an insult."
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, wait a minute, but I'm so much more than all these messages. I still know how to do other stuff. And so I wrote a whole essay on "Okay, boomers."
I love that. As you're writing, particularly in this book, there are characters that seem familiar to me. Are any of your characters based on people that you know in real life?
Not really. I know that sounds funny, but not really. I think that
Or elements of them, maybe?
a teeny bit. There are some characters, we all know the person that the guy that we dated that was horrible. So yeah, maybe there's a little of that person. Or we all know the person that is a wonderful person, so the love of your life. So maybe there's a little of that in Jeff. Friends, I have lots of good friends. You're one of them. So maybe Bonnie, being such a good friend, I know how a good friend would respond. But not particularly anyone.
Your book sounds amazing.
Thank
But
you.
and I know it to be because I read it. But even more than that, I think that the reader, people who are lucky enough not to have read it yet, are going to find it amazing. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
this here today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. And anyone out there, thank you for listening.
In closing, thank you so much for watching this episode of Books and the World. More episodes can be found on our website, which is capecodwritercenter.org. Thank you.